Today on the Idiot's Guide, it seems nowadays everyone likes to talk about politics. Kind of like flatulence in an elevator. That's fancy speak for a fart. It always goes well in those awkward moments, I think. I guess we don't talk so much as we scream, yell, hurl insults in order to die on the hill we came in on. People, we've gotten completely out of hand. So how do I disagree and play nice at the same time? Imagine a world that doesn't riot when their candidate doesn't win. It's still possible. We're not that far gone yet. I'm your host, Adam Richardson, aka the Profit Hacker, and I'm joined by the man in charge, Mr. Joe Hasler. Welcome to the Idiot's Guide. I don't know if you see the same thing I see lately, but I feel like we all do a really terrible job of communicating our opinions about politics, how we feel about our specific people that we admire, different policies that are out there. And honestly, it's very, I feel like it's challenging because it's something that our culture can't have a civilized conversation anymore. They always come with like, okay, these are all of the weapons I'm going to bring to this discussion, rather than it being like, let's talk about all this sort of stuff so we can figure it out. But I think that because of that, like even the people who pursue that civil discourse, or whatever, civil discourse, that you still face a challenge with it being, the other side of that discussion on either end gets their feelings hurt, like you came with an agenda to attack them. And it's quite frankly, like, I know that like typically when you go out and you're going with friends and you're like, oh man, we're gonna hang out today, you usually, like, the last thing you want to have a conversation with is politics. It's like, what is it? Like the worst things are like religion, politics, I don't know, like
I think those are the
most recent medical procedure, like you're like, that's just oversharing,
Yeah, never talk politics or religion.
Yeah,
That's the rule.
because it's so, so segmented and divisive in just the thought, like, you say you are this, you have now planted a flag, and especially if the whole society as a whole is so divided as it is right now, like you really, really are looking for an argument.
I think a lot of people do that, but I mean, we talked about this before on a previous podcast, how it's really not as divisive as a lot of people think it is. There's a lot more commonality. But yeah, there are a lot of people that just come raring for a fight. They're expecting you to be different from their opinion, and so they want to just immediately argue. They come into the conversation on the defensive.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest part of it. I mean, politics, no one sees eye to eye. On politics, on a whole lot of issues. Parenting, not everyone sees eye to eye. Politics, religion, lifestyle. There are a lot of areas where we don't see eye to eye, and yet we still seem to somehow get along.
Yeah.
Until it comes to politics. And it doesn't need to be that way. It doesn't have to be so divisive. You don't have to go in with an argument in mind and ready to fight it out.
So I think one of the things that I kind of put together in this episode is just some ways for us to enter into a civil conversation and really take from it value, even if you are on, complete opposite ends of that perspective. I think I was trying to unpack a role play a conversation in my head, and the thing I ran into was the fact that I think of the word like judgmental. especially when you talk about like different positions that people take about different things, especially really, really hot button items, like if I was to say swear words like immigration, or women's rights, or, like those are like, you hint towards it and you're like, oh, let me just add, I have this blowtorch right here. I'm just going to pour some gasoline right in front of it while it's headed that direction. I'm like, that's all you're doing is lighting the room on fire. And it sucks that you can't even have a civilized discussion about that, especially if it's from an opposite sex perspective.
Yeah.
So, and I don't want to gender, or misgender, but the idea of this is like, you have these really antagonistic subjects that are so over the top on both ends, like inflammatory, and there's no reason for them to be.
No. I mean, the idea is, this whole nation, we talked about this during our MILF series, this nation was built on freedom to have your own opinion.
Yeah.
And to respect someone else's opinion. Just because they don't see the world the same way as you doesn't mean they're the enemy. It doesn't mean that they're someone that you need to fight against. They just have a different opinion. We're all Americans. And we all have different viewpoints. We all see things differently. We understand things differently. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. It's okay to see the world differently. But to enter into that civil discourse, you have to be civil about it.
I think that's the challenge. Like, so my personality is very forward. I also like to be a little bit more of the attention. So I like to kind of command the space that I'm in. And that can be very harmful to a discussion. Not necessarily, like, my intent is not, my intent, I come peacefully, but I also command those spaces. And so it's just, it's something I feel naturally compelled to do. And so I will pursue that in any environment, any discussion. And, so one of the first ones that, like, in this is the pursuit of understanding. And honestly, like, understand before you argue. That's kind of, this first one I want to kind of unpack, but it's this, the power of listening. Like, shut up and listen, because that right there, not only does it, like, if you come with your own ammo, but you don't understand the other person and you're just going to hurl this stuff at this person, then all you're going to do is enrage the conversation. But if you sit there and you go like, man, I want to hear this. I want to hear a conversation. What's your valid points? Like, not that you're dumb, you're stupid, you don't agree with me, I hate you. You're like, those aren't valid points. But, but if you have a good conversation, like, my wife and I have been listening to a podcast recently about some of these kind of polarizing subjects, and they're from both ends of the spectrum. And they're, the good thing about it is the fact that these people have good conversation, but they don't sit there and hurl insults. They don't sit there and, they come understanding that other person. And then when that other person is talking, they shut up and they listen and they're like, yeah, like, okay, I see this, so you're not jumping into this debate without understanding someone else's perspective.
Yeah, one important part of any debate. So if you ever watch a debate online or ever did debate in high school or college or anything like that, one of the first things that you do in a debate is you define terms.
Yeah.
Because perspective is different. And so in psychology and therapy, there is the actual communication, and then there is perceived communication. So when you say something, you have a meaning, you have an intent, you have what you think you're saying. But then the other person, they may not hear what you actually said because they've got a different perspective, they got a different viewpoint. And so they perceive what you said differently. And so there's two sides of this communication that just by having communication can completely derail what you're trying to do.
And that's communication in general. Not like specific hot topics. Like now you're talking about like asking your kid to go take out the trash.
Exactly.
And they're like, I took out one piece of trash because you weren't specific.
Exactly.
And you're like, now you're grounded.
And it's that idea that actual versus perceived communication can, in any conversation that we have, derail it.
Yes.
But then when you add these hot topics to it, or these hot button topics, not the store, when you have these hot button topics to it, now you have even more potential for miscommunication. And so in any debate that you go into, you define your terms first.
Yeah.
And say, when I say gender, I mean this. When I say biological sex, I mean this. Now that can be a debate in and of itself.
I mean, just like what you said. I mean, you shared a perspective that maybe you have on that.
Exactly.
And you know, unfortunately, you're also going to run into others that don't share that. It's not fluid to them. So the definition is very cut and dry. It's black and white. And so it's not this, you know, for lack of a better word, philosophical, you know, definition where it broadens the horizon of what it is. It provides all of these options and asks more questions about it. And you're like, yeah, but you know, then the other person is like an engineer. It's yes or no.
Right. and that's the important part of it, is if you go into that conversation, if you go into that discourse by defining your terms first, then you can come to an agreement of terms.
Right.
And so if I am talking to someone who does not see gender as a spectrum, then now I know in this conversation, when they say gender, they're talking about something very specific that is different from my view of gender.
Mm-hmm.
And so now when we talk, we can be speaking the same language. Even though we've got different viewpoints, we can now talk the same language because we've defined our terms. And understanding those terms is really important. You knowing what you want to say is important. You can't define the terms if you haven't done the research to understand what does that term actually mean. Like if you talk about immigration, do you understand the immigration that's going on, or are you just reading the headlines on the news articles? Have you looked at the statistics? And that's something that when we've talked about immigration before, we do the research.
Right.
You know, we look at what are the numbers coming across, what are the statistics, what are all the actual details of all that, and that forms an opinion. Your opinion could be anywhere along that ideology for immigration control. But if you have the understanding, if you have the knowledge about the detail, that helps you to have a firm and solid understanding.
Well, have an understanding about your own position and where you land on that. And then also consider the counter for that. So, you know, part of that is, you know, if it's in the discussion that you're having, you're actively listening to them. Mm-hmm. And you're trying to kind of say, like, put yourself in my shoes, you know. Now, granted, if you're on some extreme item or extreme topic, some people don't even want to consider those shoes. Like, they're like, I don't ever want to even, like, I feel like I would have to take a shower if I was to wear your shoes, you know, kind of a thing. Like, and maybe you're not the type of person that should have a debate, but you know, the healthy discussion is to really kind of at least you know, get some level of empathy, I guess, foster that, and you know, and really kind of pursue again, actively listening. So hearing you know, all the things that you want to say about your position, and hopefully that's reciprocated. You want to hear all the things that I want to say, so that, you know, when we come to a better understanding, we have a mutual agreement, whether that's an agreement or not.
Yeah.
You know?
And most of the time when someone comes back hurling insults or anything like that, it's because you have challenged their position. And most of the time they don't have an understanding enough of their own position to be able to articulate an argument back.
Yeah.
A position back. And so since they have nothing else to fall back on, they say, well, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
And now we generally like idiots here, and we don't like it ever used in the derogatory. But
I happen to be partial to the idiot that I am.
But the idea is, if you understand your position well enough to be able to say that, and you listen to the other position,
yeah,
now you're much better at articulating an argument back that may be different. But one of my biggest pet peeves is when people say that something is not logical because it's not scientific. Logical is not always scientific. So science follows logic.
Sure.
But many other positions that defy science or don't agree with science are still also logical. So logical simply means that you are able to reason from one position to the next. So there is a reasonable movement from one idea to the next to come to your conclusion. So long as you're not making any wild leaps in there, it's logical. It may not be scientific, but it's logical. And that's the important thing. You can have completely differing ideas, completely differing viewpoints, but both of you can be logical about those arguments and being understanding of that. And so long as they are presenting a logical argument, and that's where the research, that's where the understanding, that's where all that comes in, you have to be open to them having a different logical argument, because logic is just one step to the next.
I think it's the pursuit of common ground, and honestly, like your goal is to eliminate as much stress in that conversation as possible by seeking to understand each side of this. Like the idea would be like, if you went to a fast food drive-through, okay, and in the fast food drive-through, I'm sitting there and I'm like, blah, 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 and you just like skyrocket this thing out through the intercom. First off, you can't ever understand the person when they're like, well, how's it? And you're like, can I order? No. Okay. I'd like and you just spit it out too quickly. Well, like maybe what's going to happen is you're probably going to get a fish sandwich instead of that burger that you wanted, and because of that miscommunication barrier that you're jumping out, you're getting out there, you're shooting that information out there too quickly. And then that other person is trying to decipher what you said, how quickly you said it, and produce something from it. So whether that's a response, and, so rather than like take that time, listen and really confirm on what that information, like ask questions, like go back and, when you said this, did you mean this? Sort of a thing. Like I want to make sure so that when, like, as we go along in this discussion, I know where you are in this. And that's validating their position. It may not be yours, but that's at least you're seeing, their point of view at that point. Plus, really, honestly, like at the end of the day, no one likes to argue with a drive-through speaker. It's the most obnoxious thing in the world.
Yeah.
What is it? And then? No, and then. And then? No, and then.
No, and then. And then. No, and then.
All right. So if you enjoy the content, don't forget to subscribe and join our awesome community. It's quick, it's easy, and you'll never miss out on the latest videos. Hit that subscribe button now and let's grow together. The second one I want to talk about is, what are your thoughts on, like, in an intense discussion, lightening the mood? Okay. So I'm kind of back and forth on this. Why? Because sometimes I'm really bad at it because I can be a really intense person, but especially if I'm really focused on something or it's like a really big discussion. But I also like when I throw in these little, like, just stupid comments. Okay. Like, just to diffuse things, I guess. That's kind of the thought about it.
That's exactly the idea. Is it helps to lessen the intensity when you throw in some of those.
Yeah.
So, and you never want to, when you do say something funny or anything like that, don't direct it at the person you are talking to. So don't make a joke about them.
Right.
This is where self-deprecating humor really comes in handy.
Yeah.
Because if things are getting really heated, and as you're talking, you're getting really boisterous with
animated.
your hands, and you knock something over. Well, that's a perfect opportunity to make a joke about how clumsy you are.
Yeah.
And that eases the tension. And so it is a great way. Sometimes it falls flat and it doesn't really work.
Yeah.
But trying to do that really helps.
I have a friend who, like in awkward moments and things like that, he has a super, super dark sense of humor. And so whenever he says something in a serious conversation, you're like, wow, you just took it way too far. Okay. But it's always self-deprecating. So we're like, wow, you need to see a therapist, like he's funny. He's really funny, but it's just so dark. It's almost to the point where like, if you don't know him, you could get easily offended by him. But knowing him, you understand that like that darkness is just the right kind of thing that derails the intensity completely. It just neutralizes it, because he's like, oh, you think this is tense? Check this out, and you're like, skadoosh. And then all of a sudden you're all going like, poor guy. Okay, what were we talking about?
Right. and it really does help. Now, again, sometimes it falls flat, and it may not always work, but it's always worth a try.
Yeah.
And again, it's the self-deprecating. Now, and this is on, there's a lot of debates and a lot of arguments that go on about politics right now. Differing views on a lot of very serious topics. But being able to, on either side of that spectrum, whether you're on the right side or the left side, whatever side of the political spectrum you are, moderate, anywhere, being the one to be able to recognize, hey, things are getting a little heated right now. I'm going to make fun of myself to try to ease that. That to me shows a reasonable person.
Yeah.
Because it's showing that they truly do understand where they stand on that political spectrum, and they're not trying to make war. They're trying to explain their point and hopefully convince someone to change their viewpoints, which is the whole point of a debate. But if it doesn't work, they're okay with that. They're confident in their own selves that they're okay with that. And if they're the ones that can be self-deprecating in that moment, or halt the conversation by making some kind of a joke, they may lose ground in being able to convince someone of their position. But if it's already getting that heated, they're probably losing ground anyway.
Right.
And so this helps to bring it back. And that's that reasonable person being able to say, okay, let's take a moment and regroup.
Yeah.
And if both sides can do that in an argument, it makes it a lot easier, and then it's a lot less one-sided. And that's where you were talking about finding that common ground, where now you've both made fun of yourselves, and there's a little bit of understanding there. And that helps the conversation move forward. A debate is about convincing someone. When you have a political debate, it's about convincing someone else to change their viewpoint, whether the person you're debating or the audience of the debate.
Yeah.
Because the idea is you want to articulate yourself to change their view. And if you are so heated and so combative, I don't know of anyone that does well with a combative leader. You've been in the military. I've heard stories of drill sergeants. I've had a couple of teachers who were drill sergeants. And as much as drill sergeants yell, there's still a level of compassion or understanding from drill sergeants that allow you to respect them. What's your perspective on that?
It depends on the ego of the drill sergeant, but for the most part, and what they are trained to do is very much push you to go beyond yourself. And so it's kind of like, and they do it in a very yelly, aggressive way, but the idea is going like, if I see somebody, I see the somebody you can be.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to push you past what you think are your limitations so that you reach deep down inside and find that you and drive forward with it.
Yes,
And sometimes it takes somebody full on screaming in your face, letting you know that everything you imagine you are is a pile of dung, and and then you're supposed to rise above that, like in any other world, no, but somehow you rise above that and you are a very well-trained machine when you're done.
Yeah.
And it's in that sense, I think it's thinking you're thinking greater than somebody else, I guess, in that sense.
And how hard is it for new recruits to deal with that for, say, the first week of boot camp?
Oh, weeping, crying, they're falling asleep in their tears.
And
it's just pathetic.
And the only way that works is they begin to see the change, and then they begin to accept it.
Yes.
And that's what the drill sergeant wants.
Yep.
But in that first week, you're not going to get through to them.
But they know just the amount of pressure to do that, not
Right.
so that it doesn't break you, it pushes you.
Yeah, and they are specialized in that. They're
Yes.
trained, and they've done a lot of work to be drill sergeants. It's not a job that I assume anyone can
Which
do.
is a form of psychological manipulation, but potato, tomato.
But I mean, they're going in a drill in a military combat zone. You need that kind of training.
Absolutely.
And so
Yeah.
there's a reason it's psychological manipulation. But when we're talking about a debate, if you're going in like a drill sergeant and they'd have no respect for you, what you're going to get is that first week of new recruits.
Well,
People
one of the
who
things-
are just incapable of comprehending. Over time, maybe that method can work if you're able to build that relationship with someone and they know that's who you are, but you're never going to have that time in a regular debate.
And I would say like a drill sergeant is this, and they have the commercial of the one like they use him in the drill sergeant from now I can't remember the name of the movie, Full Metal Jacket. Okay. And he was in a commercial and the guy's like, and this is the reason why blue makes me sad, and he's like, do you know what makes me sad? And the guy's like, what? You do, and he's like, all of a sudden he just goes into drill sergeant mode and he's just like, whoa, but it is like picking on him because he's such a pathetic thing. But one of the things I recognize is that drill sergeants, when they're training, they use all of his like ate up like a soup sandwich kind of thing, like these different phrases that are entertaining. And you like, even for me, I'm you think about Major Payne is another one where he's like, one tubby, so you're making this intense situation where you're making the whole platoon do push-ups, and you're like, they're doing push-ups and you don't break the plane. He's like, one, can't see it. One, you're not doing push-ups yet. One, what? So, and so that's like, you're laughing.
Yeah.
That's the kind of diffusion that happens in that they have such an intensity about it. It's loud, it's aggressive, but then they throw in these like phrases that just make you chuckle, and you can't complete what you're doing because it lightens the intensity of that, so that in the moment you're not just overwhelmed by somebody screaming in your head.
Exactly. And that's the whole thing. And so if we go out there and we think we're going to act like a drill sergeant to convince someone of our viewpoint, it's never going to work.
They use humor too. So don't act like a drill sergeant without that perception.
Without actually knowing what a drill sergeant does, without having drill sergeant training. I mean, and it's a very intensive in order to get military personnel ready for combat and things like that. And that's why they have to do it the way that they do. But any other environment, it doesn't work, and it shouldn't be used.
And if you find yourself maybe terrible at having a sense of humor, you can't say a joke, you don't have any sort of funny bone in your possession, I would say, think about this. I'm going to give you a perspective to have, and this is something you can mentally have in place, that if you're in an argument and it's getting intense, to kind of lighten your own mood about it, think about like trying to explain quantum physics to a dog. First off, you're talking to a dog. That's done right there. It's stupid, but it's complicated as well because there's a lot of confusion, and sometimes you can just laugh about the whole situation in the sense of, if that's the scenario and you're in this intense discussion going, Fido, this is, and in your head, all you're doing is just kind of taking the pressure off in your own mind. And I'm not saying like, having a conversation and your friend and it's getting intense and you're like, hey, Joe, this is kind of like explaining quantum physics to a dog. No?
Yeah, that's a little insulting.
I'm insulted.
But when things are so serious, it's imagining that kind of a scenario where you're arguing, these two dogs are arguing about quantum physics. And I guess, it's a silly equation, but it's just something to just kind of take your mind away from maybe an argument that's getting too intense. Throw something irrational in your brain and then come back at it again so that you kind of distract for a moment. Before we go on to the last one and kind of wrap up here in just a sec, I want to talk about our Patreon. I know that we're trying to kind of add more content. We have our editors working on some B-roll and playing around with some of that kind of stuff. So Patreon, tell me a little bit about this Patreon account that we have here, Joe.
So Patreon is an opportunity for our viewers to support the channel so that we can do a lot more. We can get better cameras. We can get more ability to provide better information to our audience. And so when you sign up for Patreon, you get special privileges. So there are certain tiers where you can get your name shouted out at the end of our videos, where you get your name listed on the videos, where you can see behind the scenes footage of when we're here getting ready or in between. Just about every video we have, while the title rolls, we're over here doing our little dances. And so you get to see those little dances we do every time. So sign up for the Patreon, if for nothing else than to see us do our little dances as we're waiting for the intros.
Stop dancing, Joe.
Sorry. Join Patreon.
Patreon.com/TIG_HPF. All right. So the last one is agree to disagree. This art of peaceful coexistence.
Seek peaceful coexistence.
There are lots of groups of people that I have conversations with, and I've had moments where I've kicked them out of my house because it isn't peaceful coexistence. It is argumentative confrontation, and there's no end in sight. Mm-hmm. And so you just kind of go like, look, I'm going to agree to disagree, but I'm also going to agree that you don't need to be here anymore. And that's not a productive sort of scenario, but sometimes you have to. I'm not saying that, if all else fails, go ahead and kick them out. But it's more the pursuit of agreeing that you don't see, that you don't share the same perspective, and that is okay.
Yeah, we're not always going to agree about everything. No one does.
Yeah.
And so being open to saying, I can't agree with you, but that's your viewpoint. And I'm not going to change you. You're not going to change me. But we can still happily coexist.
I think the reason why you don't talk about politics or religion in discussion is because those are probably the two most polarizing subjects that you can think of. Like if it's like a grocery list or where to go to dinner for the night or something like that, that's one thing. But when you're talking about a political stance or a religious position, or denomination,
Yeah.
the entire goal is usually to convert that person.
Well, I mean, and the seriousness of it. If you're talking about religion, most of the time it's going to be, are you going to heaven where you are going to enjoy the rest of eternity, or are you going to hell where there is fire and brimstone?
Right. And then you have differing perspectives about that.
Yeah,
So
and then differing
it's
perspectives
broad.
about, at what degree do you go to hell? At what degree do you go to heaven? What actions lead you to go to hell? What actions lead you to go to heaven?
Yeah.
What is heaven? What is hell? If it's a non-deity religion, then is it, what's the manner of it? Are you making progress towards something? Are you not making progress towards something? And so with religion, it's very, I mean, even the Buddhist religion is where, so I follow a Buddhist religion where there is not a deity. So it's it's Theravadan Buddhism. And so even in that perspective, there is the idea that one's goal is to reach enlightenment. And it may take many lifetimes to achieve that, but it's a non-deity religion that still has a perspective of an end goal. And so you've got these very, very differing viewpoints. And then you talk about politics. It's talking about, I mean, this is an extremely hot topic, is abortion. Is abortion something that a woman, as it is her body, her right to choose what happens to her body, or is it the death of a potential person?
Why would you misgender somebody like that and call them a her?
There's a whole nother thing. And so,
sorry, I just threw that sideways, but yeah, I get it. I totally
there are these
understand.
very serious topics that people have very serious viewpoints, and these are very serious ideas. Someone who believes that abortion is the death of a child, that is very serious to them.
Yeah, I mean, that crosses the lines of both of the off-limit topics,
Right. And then on the other side, you've got someone who does not see it as the death of a child and sees it as destruction of their right.
Yeah.
Their fundamental God-given right to choose their own path and what happens to their own body. And so these are very diametrically opposed viewpoints that are very, very serious. But at the end of the day, we have to agree to disagree.
I think it's that pursuit of unity, like we all want to get along. We all want to be, in that, even if we have extreme differences in our perspective, it's always, and everybody mutually agreeing to pursue that unity. That like, it's, guys, it's respecting. That's it. Like I don't agree with stuff Joe says, not entirely. There are things that we do agree on, but there are lots of things that we don't agree on.
No.
But that doesn't mean that we're like, that's it. We're done. No conversation. Well, otherwise this podcast wouldn't exist. But, but also it's the idea of going like, look, I respect Joe and I really want to pursue a place where we can have a good conversation and even still end on the fact that we still don't agree on these things. He's not trying to win me over for his perspective. And likewise, I'm not looking to win him over in my perspective. I'm asking for a little bit of visibility. And likewise, he's doing the same. As I see and understand where he's coming from.
Well, I think to some degree, there is an attempt to convince someone to change their point of view.
Yeah.
That's what debate, that's what conversation is all about. You want to explain your viewpoint, challenge someone else's viewpoint to help them understand either their viewpoint better or come over to your understanding.
Yeah.
But that doesn't always work. It rarely ever works. In the few times where you are able to convince someone to change their point of view, great. Other times, you're not going to be able to change their point of view. And that's not a slight against them. That's not a slight against you. That is just the human condition. They have their logical reasoning for why they see the world the way they do. And you have the logical understanding and reasoning for the way you see the world the way it is. And you can try to convince someone else, but if it doesn't work, you walk away with an understanding that you have both become more understanding of your own viewpoint and understanding of the other person's viewpoint.
Yeah.
And recognize you're both human that have a different point of view and be okay with that and still be able to be friends.
Yep.
And still be able to work and enjoy time with one another. And I think discourse is very healthy. Talking about why you like one food versus another, why this food is healthier than another.
Yeah.
But in the end, you're not going to be able to convince someone to always eat healthy. They're going to want their cheeseburgers. But you did what you can, and you can still be friends, even if they start packing on the pounds. But that's the idea. And I know we're joking, calling it food, but that's really what it comes down to in politics and religion and anything that is heated debate. The idea that you can let them know, but let them choose. We all have a right to choose. We all have a fundamental human right to choose a path for ourselves, whatever that viewpoint is. And as Americans, we have a freedom to be able to be ourselves.
I think it's, the perspective of it not looking like it's going to be a battle. You sigh and you're like, man, I don't look forward to this conversation. Like you're going to have some serious ones, but don't take it that serious to the sense where you're going to bring a sword to that conversation.
Yeah.
If you picture it like the buffet and enjoy the different options that are available to you. You don't necessarily have to eat everything. But really it's understanding, before you start any kind of argument in your own position, is understanding the other person, not necessarily fully understanding your equipping of your own perspective. That makes it extremely biased, and it makes it really hard to argue. But then on the other side of it is lighten it up a little bit. Simmer down, Coco. Geez Louise, what's wrong with you? Why are you so intense all the time? Like sometimes throwing some of that in there just kind of deflects or diffuses that conversation just enough to where you can carry on and not be in attack mode all the time. And then I think last is just acknowledging the fact that you're not going to convert somebody to whatever you're imagining, and they're going to put on your t-shirt or your jersey or wear your flag or whatever it is. It's agree to disagree. We have differing perspectives and respect that about each other. And we can actually have a little bit better conversation that way when we are coming in there without the battle axe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really don't have anything else to say to that. Just be respectful. That's what it comes down to. Respect everyone. And that's both sides of the political spectrum. That's everyone. The right needs to have a respect for the left, and the left needs to have a respect for the right, that they are allowed to choose that viewpoint for themselves. And we're allowed to choose our viewpoint for ourselves. That's the joy of America.
Yeah.
And so politically, we don't have to be as divisive as we seem to be. We can come together and we can share in the things that we have in common and agree to disagree about the things that we don't.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome then. I mean, we've reached the end of our show for today. That's pretty good. Hey, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Don't forget that. Smash that like button like the kids in the olden days used to say. Life's too short, so keep laughing and learning. And remember, idiots have way more fun.
Check your shoes.